Hello, I'm Harold Munro, editor-in-chief at the Vancouver Sun, and joining me is Dan Fumano, our City Hall columnist for the Sun and the Province. Hey, Dan.
Hi, Harold.
So council's back at it. I know last week there was more from the mayor's task force looking into city finances and again talking about suggesting that the funding model for local governments, I guess not just Vancouver but across the province, in their mind is broken. What's the sort of Coles Notes version of what they think is wrong with city funding?
Well, this is something that obviously we've heard for years and years now from different municipal leaders across Canada. It's not unique to Vancouver or BC. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been trying to argue for a long time that municipal governments are dealing with more and more and spending more money and resources confronting issues that weren't traditionally the responsibility of local governments, but they're needing to spend time and money on these issues now increasingly, whether it's homelessness and affordable housing, also childcare, also health care is clearly a provincial responsibility, but you've got increasingly municipalities like Vancouver are spending money not only on overdose sort of crisis response, but also now, the new city government in Vancouver has decided to fund the hiring of mental health nurses, which is obviously different and sort of stepping out of their traditional role. So you've got the city government actually spending money to hire nurses, responding to sort of a mental health crisis. So for a long time, you've had these municipal governments saying that they need a different way of raising money. We often hear the number for every dollar in taxes that gets raised, only 10 cents goes to the municipal government. Most of the money goes to provincial and federal governments, and municipalities are not able to tax. Most municipalities are not able to tax sales or tax income, right? They just have property taxes. And when your property values go up, it doesn't mean that the city collects more revenue. They just collect however much revenue they need to fund their budget. But city budgets have been going up much faster than the rate of inflation or property growth or population growth. So it's this sort of untenable situation. Now, the task force, they pointed to some recent examples in Ontario just a couple of months ago. The Ontario government and the government of Toronto, the province's biggest city, they announced what they called a historic New Deal, where the province was going to be providing operational funding for things like homeless shelters and stuff. And then in Quebec as well, the Quebec government just recently passed a new bill that is meant to give municipalities more different abilities to tax different things with the aim of kind of diversifying the municipal government's revenue sources. So that the task force here in Vancouver, they pointed to those examples. But then they also looked more closely, here in BC, and because they were focused on City of Vancouver specifically, right? And they were saying that, the City of Vancouver, because it has more expensive real estate, they were making the argument that the City of Vancouver sends more money to the province in the additional schools tax and things like that. So you have the extra tax on high value properties. They're saying City of Vancouver sends way more to the province than it gets in return. And they were trying to make those arguments. But yeah, and here in BC, the Union of BC Municipalities has been also trying to raise this issue for a long time. There is a sort of working group between the UBCM and the provincial government, and they're trying to work on changing the municipal funding model. And they're supposed to report back later at some point this year with some, I think they call them options for consideration. I don't know if that will lead to legislative change, but they are supposed to be reporting back later this year.
Well, I imagine when you referenced Quebec's solution being given local governments more taxing authority to tax more things, that a few people got nervous about that, because if you give governments more taxing power, they're going to use them. And then that on the other end of the scale, the feds and the province are not actually going to reduce taxes to offset that. So we'd all end up paying more under that circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the premier of Quebec was out there saying, just because we sort of warning municipalities, saying just because we've given municipalities the ability to do these extra taxes, we don't think you should necessarily go and do them right away. It's like, well, but what do
They
what
need
do
the
you?
money. Well, it's interesting, Dan, because you've also written quite a lot about the fact that we have the massive infrastructure deficit. So even as city budgets are going up, again, not just in Vancouver, but all the
Yeah,
major cities locally and across the country, we're still falling further and further behind, both, I guess, in terms of sewer water infrastructure, roads, and of course at the metro level with TransLink and transit services. So it's not just that we need an infusion of revenue to pay for new things. We
yeah,
can't even keep up with the monthly bills, if you will.
yeah. Oh yeah, the infrastructure costs are massive and mounting, and there's these are very expensive projects, whether it's new wastewater treatment projects. The Metro Vancouver is that Metro Vancouver is facing huge cost increases on various very big water infrastructure projects. And then, of course, when Metro Vancouver is trying to figure out how to pay for these infrastructure needs, and they were considering implementing these very big increases on development charges, right? On fees that Metro
Yes.
Vancouver can charge on new development. And then you had the federal housing minister. This was just a few months
Right.
ago, I think it's back in the fall. The federal housing minister sort of stepped in and told Metro Vancouver, don't you dare increase these development fees by so much, because it's going to jeopardize new housing getting built. New housing won't get built. And so you had a weird situation where the federal housing minister was telling these regional government representatives, it's a bunch of locally elected mayors and councillors who serve on the board of Metro Vancouver, telling them not to do this big fee hike for development charges. And then it was actually a relatively close vote when they voted on
Yes,
it,
that's
but
right.
they voted to go through with the development fee increases, and some of the metro directors were quite upset. They were pretty perturbed at the federal housing minister for sticking his nose in, and they pointed out, they said, look, he's not just the federal housing minister, he's also the minister responsible for infrastructure. So if he has a better way, if he wants to pony up the bill, if he wants to pay for all of these massive infrastructure needs that we have, then maybe we wouldn't need to charge all this money on new development in order to pay for it. But absent some other way of us getting money, we don't have any other ways to pay for all of this stuff. That was kind of the position they took. It's so,
Right.
again, there's
Right.
no easy magic solution for where all this money is supposed to
Now,
come
I
from.
think to sort of bring us up to date on that, you're right. I mean, and he had kind of said you're not going to get some of this access to federal housing money. I think he's kind of backed off of that a little bit now that he's had some meetings with people. I don't know if everybody's got their money, but it started to flow to Vancouver and a few other places, I think, in recent weeks, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the status of those projects is, because I mean, I remember it was Burnaby and Surrey were the two projects that they were basically
Yes.
all set to have big announcements and photo ops, and they got canceled. And so I'm actually not sure what the status of those Burnaby and Surrey projects actually is, but um,
Right.
yeah, I've been
Right.
hearing about money flowing through some of those things. So
Okay. Well, we have a provincial election later this year, and I'm sure we'll be talking many weeks between now and then about how issues might play out during the election. But do you expect the mayors or the UBCM or other interest groups to sort of be active on this front as far as going after who basically trying to leverage promises out of whichever political party is running to get something from them, some commitments or promises?
um yeah, I mean, I presumably, I guess, like the way we see with any election, I think um, you know, uh, yeah, I'm not sure what to expect there really, but I'm sure uh, municipal leaders will be hoping, that the the province is going to be, um, you know, promising to make things better for their constituents. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, they'll be looking for, that's the one good thing about an election from a municipal perspective, is there will be lots of promises made during an election campaign, but we'll see. I guess yeah, what's to come in the months ahead for sure. All right, okay,
Yeah.
Dan. Well, thanks for today, and we'll see you again next week.
Great. Thanks, Harold.